Mr. John Carney will be talking to a founding member of the band Chicago. So that's all coming up here on the Big 550 KTRS. Saturday, I was doing a little Christmas shopping, and I walked into the St. Peter's Barnes & Noble, saw a whole bunch of people, and it warmed the cockles of my heart because I saw so many people buying books. But there was our next guest there at a table, and she was promoting her own book, and it was called Banknotes, the true story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. And we got to talking, and I took a little flyer, and I said, why don't you come on the show and tell your story? Caroline Giamonco? Giamonco. You are a local author and the author and an English teacher, as well as the author of a book called Banknotes, the true story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You got it. Now, your background a little bit, you are an English teacher, right? English professor?
Public school teacher.
Public school teacher, English teacher.
Yes.
You love to write. You've always wanted to be a writer, right?
Actually, no.
Really?
Yeah, I've always been good at writing, and it was something that kind of toyed in the back of my mind, but I'd never really set on any particular topic that I wanted to talk about.
And this is your first book?
It's my first book.
Many people remember the name Boonie Hat Bandit because it was sort of an odd story of a bank robber who robbed a couple of banks and then sort of went away for a while and then came back and then was ultimately arrested and then convicted of bank robbery, correct?
Well, in 2007, 2008, there were a string of 12 bank robberies that happened here in the St. Louis area. And it was Keith who was doing all of them. Right. And he was the middle-class dad next door who had this other life that other people didn't realize was going on. He had been a stock trader. The market had crashed. He was having some personal and financial crises.
Right.
The housing bubble had burst, and he wasn't able to make his mortgage payment, and he was a single father, and he panicked, and so he went to where he knew the money was, which was banks. And
he wore this funny hat that they named the Boonie Hat, which I'd never heard the term Boonie Hat until he came around. Is that the official name of that hat, or is that a...
Yeah, it's a military-style hat, and I believe it was in Vietnam they started calling it the Boonie Hat.
Boonie Hats, okay. Now, how did you meet Keith?
I was teaching at the South Central Correctional Center in Licking, Missouri. I was teaching the GED program, and he interviewed to be my inmate employee. He was the tutor in my classroom that helped me teach the students.
Had you heard much about this Boonie Hat Bandit and the story?
Actually, I had. Living in Missouri, it caught my attention, and during the crime spree, I had paid attention to all the news releases that would come out, and he's very low-key, though. He didn't tell me, hey, I'm the Boonie Hat Bandit. I had to figure it out on my own. There was one day where he'd been working for me for about 2 weeks, and this young kid came up to the desk, and he kept saying, come on, man, you know you are, just admit it. And Keith kept telling him, no, just go ahead and sit down and do your work. And the kid persisted, and he finally told him, I'm too high profile to lie about why I'm in here. Have your family Google me, but for now, sit down and do your work. So I looked at Keith and I said, what was that about? And he goes, the kid thinks I'm a child molester.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, why? Because I knew he was in for robbing banks. He hadn't told me he had a name or anything like that, but I knew what he was in for. And so he said that he fit the profile, middle-aged white guy with no prior criminal background.
Right.
And he's like, look around, who are they? And I was kind of like, yeah, you got a point. And so I said, are you really high profile? And he said, well, he was on the front page of USA Today and on Good Morning America. And right then, everything just clicked in my head. And I said, you're the Boonie Hat Bandit.
You're the Boonie Hat Bandit. Caroline G Monko is our guest. She wrote the book, Banknotes, the true story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. How much time was he given?
Well, his is kind of a complicated case. We all grow up believing that we are free from double jeopardy. We're constitutionally protected for it, but that's not always the case here in Missouri. He pled guilty in federal court to all 12 of the bank robberies, and he was sentenced to 6 years and 4 months because there were no weapons involved, and he was a first-time offender. And St. Charles County, where 5 of the crimes happened, they referred everything over to the feds and said that they were good because the federal government took jurisdiction. But St. Louis County postponed their proceedings until Keith had pled guilty and been convicted in federal court, and they used that guilty plea and conviction against him in state court for basically a slam dunk prosecution. If you've said, yeah, I did this,
Right.
it's hard to defend yourself,
Right.
and gave him 20 years.
So how long is he in jail for? How long has he been in jail now?
He has been in for 8 years.
And how much longer does he have?
They ran the federal sentence concurrent to the state. So if it was just the federal, he would have been home 2 years ago.
Right.
But he still has 9 more years before he's eligible for parole.
9 more years before he's eligible for parole. Now, you are now engaged to him,
Yes.
and you are looking after his children.
Well, they're 26 now,
Oh, okay.
so I
So
don't really have to.
Look after him.
But we are close.
You are close. And you took his name. You're still engaged. I said you were married. You're engaged, planning to get married
Right.
as soon as they'll let you.
Right. We've applied to be able to get married, and we're just waiting to get accepted. There's only certain times during the year that the prison system will let you get married.
So you will, as soon as the prison system allows, you will marry him.
Yes.
So I'm sure you get the question, and I'm sure it's in banknotes, and we'll ask you here. What is it about him, or what is it about this situation that you thought, this is the man for me?
It was one of those situations where it wasn't even really a choice for us. Just as soon as we met, we had an instant connection. It was like we had just run across our long-lost best friend that we hadn't seen in years, and we just couldn't wait to talk and catch up.
Right.
And so it wasn't like, oh, well, he's cute, or, oh, she's hot. It wasn't like that. We just, as people, connected. And we both knew right from the beginning that regardless of what form it took, we wanted to have that other person in our life in some capacity.
So, friends, neighbors, relatives said, Caroline, what are you doing? The man's in jail. I don't get this. You're gonna be married to this man who's in jail, who you're not going to see on the outside for 10, 12, 9 years.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And you say?
I say that finding the right person, by the time you're an adult and you realize that even Prince Charming and Snow White had to go through some hell, that it wasn't actually a fairy tale for them either. They went through some troubles. If you find the right person, it's worth it to wait. And to me, our relationship is a living, breathing thing right now. He just happens to be incarcerated.
Are you worried that when he gets out, it'll be a different dynamic?
Nah.
And that it won't work because you and him are, you don't worry about that?
Not at all. Because
Really?
we know each other and we talk constantly, and there just isn't any uncertainty between us. There never has been since the first time we met.
How much of this is in the book?
Every bit of it.
Every bit of it. You write something in the book. The book is called Banknotes, The True Story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. Caroline G Monko is our guest, the fiancée to the Boonie Hat Bandit. She wrote the story. You write in the book, and I'm going to get it wrong, but you say something along the lines of, not all bad people are in jail. There are good people who are in jail.
There are regular people who made mistakes. And from when I was working in the prison, I realized that there's really kind of a breakdown. There's maybe 10% of the prison population that even scares the heck out of the other inmates in there. They're people that none of us would want to be around, and they should be in prison. And then you've got a large proportion, I'd say maybe 40%, who were on that preschool to prison pipeline. They almost were destined from the time they grew up in whatever zip code they were in that they were going to be funneled into prison, because I had a lot of guys in my classes who were completely shocked by the idea that not everybody ran drugs for their parents when they were kids, or drive-bys were not normal parts of life. And it was almost as though they always figured they would go to prison because Dad had gone to prison, Grandpa had gone to prison, the uncles were in prison, the cousins had gone to prison, sometimes even Mom and Grandma had gone to prison. And to them, it just was a part of what happens in a lifetime. Then you've got a certain percentage, which is a larger percentage than what a lot of people want to imagine, because they assume if you go to prison, you're a monster.
Right.
That they're a person who was a regular, everyday, hardworking individual, that something happened in their life. They got desperate, they got scared, they got angry, they made some kind of poor choice, they got themselves into some kind of business deal that they shouldn't have, they were in a love triangle, something happened that if that set of circumstances hadn't presented itself, they wouldn't be in prison either.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people, they like to think that everybody in prison is an absolute monster because it's too scary otherwise to think that somebody like me or somebody like you could be in prison. That's just a little too unsettling for most people to think that it really could happen to them.
Did he give back all the money?
What he did was he had stolen approximately $125,000 over the course of that year.
Right.
And for the most part, that was equivalent to the salary that he'd been earning. So he was using it for general living expenses, paying the mortgage and the bills.
Right.
It wasn't as though he had a $1 million stash someplace, and it wasn't like he was going off on luxurious vacations with it or anything like that. It was pretty much spent, everything except that last amount that was in the 12th robbery.
So in 9 years, 9 years for parole, that's no guarantee that he gets out.
Right.
How often do you go down and see him?
Right now, we're not allowed to because I had worked at the prison, so they have a waiting period.
How long is the waiting period?
5 years.
You can't see him for 5 years?
5 years. So we passed the 3-year mark in October, and so we have a little less than 2 years to go.
Do you talk to him on the phone?
All the time.
How often do you talk to him on the phone?
We talk probably 5-6 times a day on the phone, and we write letters.
So he has phone privileges? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
he's in an honor dorm because he's never had a write-up. He's been a model
for
prisoner.
Good behavior.
Right.
So, right.
And so they have a little more free time to be able to go out into the wing and use the phone banks.
Gotcha. Okay. So you talk every day.
Yeah.
You can't Skype or
No.
anything like that.
No.
And you write letters there all day long.
Well, not all day long,
Well,
but
often,
every day, yeah.
Every day you're writing letters. He doesn't have access to email, does he?
No. Now, the way the system is set up, we as family members can email inmates through Access Corrections, but the guys get it just as a printed out letter as though it was regular mail.
All right, now hold on a second. We're talking to Caroline G Monko, who is the author of a book called Banknotes, The True Story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. Amazon.com is the best way to get the book, right?
Amazon.com. You can also go into your local Barnes & Noble, and if they don't have it in stock anymore, they can order it for you.
Gotcha. And getting a lot of good reviews, I should say. A lot of people like this book because you do tell all.
Yeah.
You tell warts and all. So when do you think you'll be able to get married? When will they allow you to get married?
We've put in to get married in March.
So you're going to get married in March, yet you haven't seen him in 3 years and you can't see him for 2 more years.
Right.
So you will get married to this man without even seeing him?
We'll get to have a visit.
A visit.
Right.
Do we like a day, like a weekend, like a
an
hour?
A half hour.
So you'll have a half hour
Yeah.
to marry your fiance.
Yeah.
Wow. That is some story. It's worthy of a book. You should write a book.
That's a great idea.
Will you stick around for another segment?
Yeah, of course.
Caroline G Monko is the author of a book called Banknotes, The True Story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. And you said Keith listened to the show all the time when he was in St. Louis.
Yeah, before he went to prison, he listened to the show all the time.
Yeah. What a story. Caroline G Monko. The book is Banknotes, The True Story of the Boonie Hat Bandit. More with her in just a moment.